You can hear them. They are behind you in the dark. The boat is moving. You are rowing. The oars are biting the water. The lifeboat is pulling away from the ship. And, behind you, across the black surface of the North Atlantic, the voices are carrying. Not individual voices, not words, something beneath words. The sound of people in the water, hundreds of them. The sound that a human being makes when the sea is taking them, and the cold has reached the place inside that cold is not supposed to reach. It is the worst sound you have ever heard. It is the worst sound any living person has ever heard. You are rowing away from it. You have 64 people in this boat. You have 64 people, and the boat can hold 65, and behind you there are hundreds. You know this. You have the numbers in your head, with a precision that will not let you round them down, or soften them, or put them somewhere you cannot see them. 64 in the boat. Hundreds in the water. The lifeboat capacity and the arithmetic of what is possible and the arithmetic of what is happening do not align, and they will never align. And you are the officer in charge, and the decision is yours. Row toward them, or row away. You are 28 years old. This is the hardest thing you will ever decide, and you have to decide it now. This is a story about what it costs to survive. Not physically, the physical cost of the North Atlantic on a cold April night, the frostbite and the exposure and the hours of rowing in the dark. These things are real, but they are not the cost this story is about. The cost this story is about is the one you carry afterward, the one that has no weight you can measure, and no wound you can show anyone, and no treatment that addresses it. The one that is simply there when you wake up, and there when you lie down, and there in the spaces between everything else for the rest of your life. His name was Harold Lowe. He was 28 years old, fifth officer of the RMS Titanic, born in Barmouth, Wales. The son of a man who made his living from the sea, and who had given his son the sea as inheritance before Harold was old enough to decide if he wanted it. He had been at sea since he was 14. He had served on cargo ships in West Africa and on passenger vessels in the Atlantic trade, and he had worked his way up through the ranks with the specific combination of ability and stubbornness that the sea selects for, that it demands before it gives you anything back. He had never lost a ship. He had never lost a passenger. He had never stood in a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean at 2 in the morning, listening to the sound of people dying behind him, and had to make a decision about what to do. Until now. Until tonight. In this story, you are Harold Lowe. The oars are in your hands. The sound is behind you. The decision is yours, and it always will be. You should understand something about yourself before this night begins. You are not a sentimental man. This is not a flaw. On a working ship, sentimentality is a luxury that the sea takes from you early, the way it takes other things. The certainty that the weather will hold. The assumption that the machinery will not fail. The belief that your experience and competence are sufficient armor against everything the ocean can produce. The sea is very old and very patient, and it has been removing the sentimentality from sailors for as long as there have been sailors. And by 28 you have had 14 years of the process, and the result is a man who is precise and quick and not given to hesitation, who gives orders with a directness that younger crew members sometimes mistake for coldness. And it is not coldness. It is the economy of a man who has learned that in an emergency, the distance between the right action and the wrong action is often measured in seconds, and that anything that slows the movement from thought to action, doubt, emotion, the paralysis of too many options, costs lives. You have seen this. You have seen what hesitation does on a working vessel. The cascade of consequences from a decision delayed by 3 seconds, and you have made the economy of decision-making into a discipline, a practice, something you maintain the way you maintain your uniform and your logbook. You are good at your job. You know this without arrogance, because you know it the same way you know the shape of a sea chart. Empirically, from observation, from the evidence of 14 years. And you are also, and this matters, a man with a temper, not a violent temper, not the explosive, uncontrolled fury of a weak man. The temper of a man who has a precise sense of what is right and what is wrong and who experiences the gap between them as a personal affront, as something that demands a response. You have gotten into trouble for this temper before. In Southampton, before sailing, you had a sharp exchange with a passenger, a pushy American who was trying to board before his section was called and who responded to your correction with the specific condescension of a man who was used to purchasing his way past inconveniences. And you told him, in terms that were professional but unmistakably clear, exactly where he could go. Your superior heard about it. You were spoken to. You do not regret it. But tonight your temper will be the least of your problems. Tonight you will wish, for the first time in your life, that the thing driving you was something colder and more manageable than the furious, complicated sense of what is right that has been both your engine and your trouble for 28 years. Because what is right tonight has two answers, and both of them will cost you something you cannot afford to pay. You are asleep when it happens. Your watch ended at 10. You went below at 10 past, made your log entries, sat on the edge of your bunk for a moment in the particular way of a man who is tired enough to sleep, but whose mind is still running through the small, unresolved things of the day. A davit fitting on boat 14 that had seemed slightly stiff. A discrepancy in the passenger count for D-deck that turned out to be a clerical error. The exchange with the bosun about the boat drill that should have happened and didn't. The small accumulated debris of a day at sea that the sleeping mind sorts and files and releases. You were asleep by 10:20. The collision wakes you at 11:40. Not with violence. That is the first thing you register, even half asleep. Even the fraction of a second between unconsciousness and the awareness of something wrong. The noise is not an explosion. It is not the catastrophic collision your training has prepared you for. The unmistakable crash of a vessel, striking something hard at speed. It is instead a long, grinding shudder that comes up through the hull and through the bunk and into your body with the specific frequency of metal under stress. Metal being asked to do something metal is not supposed to do, and it lasts. You count it. The reflex of a man who times things. 8, 9, 10 seconds, and then it stops. Then silence. The engines, which have been the constant low pulse of the crossing, change note. Slow, then stop entirely. You are dressed and out of the cabin in 90 seconds. The corridor is quiet, but too quiet. The specific quiet of a ship that has stopped moving when it should be moving. A silence with the quality of something withheld. You pass two stewards in the corridor and read their faces the way you read weather. Something is wrong, something more than a minor incident, and they have been told to appear calm, and they are appearing calm with the visible effort of men performing a thing they do not feel. You go up. You find a first officer on the boat deck and you look at his face, and you stop needing to ask questions. You have read 100 faces in 100 emergencies at sea. You have never seen a face that looked like his. And you know, before a single word is spoken, that this ship is going to sink. The orders come fast, and the orders are clear, and the clarity of them is, in the first hour, almost a mercy. Uncover the boats. Check the davits. Muster the crew for your station. These are things you have drilled, things that exist in your body as muscle memory rather than thought, and you do them with the automatic efficiency of a man whose training was designed for exactly this moment, who has spent 14 years at sea being prepared for exactly this moment, and the preparation holds. Your hands know where to go. Your voice comes out steady and carries the right authority, the authority that the people around you need right now. The authority that says, I know what I am doing, follow me, we are going to do this correctly. Boat 14 is on the port side, midships. It is a standard wooden lifeboat, 30 feet long, capable of holding 65 people. Yet you know this capacity, the way you know your own name. It is one of the basic facts of the vessel, the kind of number a ship's officer carries without thinking, because it is simply part of the knowledge that keeping people alive requires. 65 people. You look at the boat deck around you, at the passengers beginning to appear from the stairwells in their lifebelts and their coats and their various states of understanding about what is happening. And the number 65 and the number of faces you can see do not occupy the same category of reality. You do not let yourself finish that calculation yet. There are boats to fill, and you are filling them. The first passengers approach the boat with the tentative caution of people doing something they have been told is a precaution rather than a necessity. But people who are still half believing the version of events where this is a temporary inconvenience rather than the actual emergency it is. A woman in a fur coat asks you if she should bring her jewelry case. You tell her to leave it. She looks at you as if you have said something outrageous. You look back at her until she puts the case down. She gets in the boat. More passengers come. You load them. Women first, then children, then the crew needed to row. The boat fills with the specific orderly slowness of people who are frightened, but not yet panicking, who are following the direction of a uniform and a voice that sounds like it knows what it is doing. You keep your voice sounding like that. It takes everything you have. Because the thing you are not saying, the thing that is sitting at the back of your throat every time you open your mouth, is this. The boats will not hold everyone on this ship. There are not enough boats. There have never been enough boats, and you have known this since your first week aboard, and you said nothing, because it was the regulation minimum, and the regulation is the regulation, and you are an officer, and officers do not say that kind of thing out loud. At 12:30, with the boat 3/4 full, and the ship's list becoming something you can feel through the soles of your shoes. A subtle, persistent wrongness. The deck not quite level. The world slightly tilted from the way the world is supposed to be. A group of men rush the boat. Not a mob. Not violence. Not exactly, but a surge. 5 or 6 men. Third class from the look of them. Young. Their faces the faces of people who have done the arithmetic and arrived at the conclusion and decided that the conclusion requires action. They come from the port side, pushing through the women who are waiting to board, pushing toward the gunwale with the specific driven energy of people for whom the ordinary social rules have become less real than the water they can see rising on the forward deck. You step in front of them. Yet you are not a large man, 5'8", lean, the build of someone who has worked on ships rather than built them. But you put yourself between the men and the boat with a complete absence of hesitation, and you look at them, and your voice, when it comes out, is the voice of a man who has decided that this is the line, and the line will not move. You tell them to get back. One of them, the one in front, dark-haired, perhaps 20, his eyes wide with the cold and the fear and the decision he has already made, takes another step forward. You fire the revolver into the air. The sound of it on the open boat deck is enormous. A flat, hard crack that cuts through the noise of the crowd and the creaking of the davits and the distant orchestra, and silences all of it for one long second. The men stop. The whole deck stops. And in that second of silence, you look at the young man in front of you, and he looks at you, and something passes between you that is not anger, and not triumph, and not anything that has a name. Something that is simply two people understanding each other completely, understanding the terrible logic of what is happening and why you are both here and what it costs. He steps back. They all step back. You lower the revolver. Your hand is shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the effort of the previous 2 minutes, the effort of holding yourself still enough to do what had to be done. You close your hand around the grip of the revolver until the shaking stops. You turn back to the boat. You keep loading. You will see that young man's face for the rest of your life. Not because you hate him, not because what he did was wrong, but because what he did was the most human thing you have ever witnessed. A man deciding he wants to live, and you stopped him. You did the right thing. You know you did the right thing, and you will see his face every time you close your eyes for 30 years. The boat goes down at 12:50. You are the last one in, the last check before the descent. Gunnel clear, no fouled ropes. The block and tackle moving freely. The crew at the oars in position. You have 64 people in a boat built for 65, and the one empty space is the one your body now fills as you swing in over the gunnel and take your position at the stern and give the order to lower. The descent is a thing you have practiced but never done in earnest, never in the dark, never with a ship this size above you and the water this far below, and the knowledge, in every cell of your body, of what is happening to the ship you are leaving. The davits release the ropes in stages, the boat swinging out over the black water, and then dropping, not fast, a controlled drop, and the ropes running through the blocks. But the feeling of it, the feeling of the boat moving downward alongside the hull while the ship's lights pass above you and the sound of the crowd on the deck above fades and the cold air thickens. The cold air that is the cold of the open ocean, and not the cold of the ship's exterior but the cold of the North Atlantic itself, which is a different kind of cold. A cold that does not feel like the absence of warmth, but like the presence of something else. Something that the ocean has been keeping in reserve for exactly this moment. The temperature of the air at this hour, at this latitude, is close to freezing. The temperature of the water is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees below the freezing point of fresh water, kept liquid by its salt content, kept at this temperature by the specific cruelty of an April night in the North Atlantic, where the cold is not an accident but simply the condition of the place, the permanent state of an ocean that does not warm for sentiment or urgency, or the fact that there are people in it who need it to be otherwise. You know what that water does to a human body. You know the timeline. You have read the medical literature, have talked to doctors who have studied cold water immersion. Know that at 28 degrees, a man has perhaps 15 to 30 minutes before his muscles cease to function, perhaps 30 to 60 before his heart stops. That the cold works inward from the extremities with methodical efficiency. That the fingers go first, and then the hands, and then the arms, and then the core, and then everything. And the body's heat surrendering territory to the ocean degree by degree until there is nothing left to surrender. You know this. The boat touches the water. You are 3 minutes away from hearing the sound. The ropes go slack. The oars go in. You give the order to pull away from the ship, and for exactly 3 minutes, as you move through the black water, away from the Titanic, you are still the man you were before. In 3 minutes you will become something else, something that does not have a name yet, that will not have a name for years, that you will spend the rest of your life trying to find the words for. The ship goes under at 2:20. You are perhaps 400 yards away when it happens. 400 yards across open water, on a flat, glassy night. The North Atlantic in the small hours of April 15th is almost perfectly calm. The absence of wind that in other circumstances would seem like a gift from the sea, but tonight feels like a deliberate cruelty, because calm water carries sound. Calm water takes the sounds that the ocean would ordinarily muffle and delivers them with a clarity that you will spend the next 40 years of your life trying to forget. You hear the ship go, not the mechanics of it, not the boilers, not the hull breaking, though those sounds are there too, and they are terrible in their own right. The groan and crack of a structure 46,000 tons giving way. At the sounds of machinery and metal reaching the limit of what engineering can hold and passing it. Those sounds are terrible. but the sound underneath them. The sound that begins as the bow goes under and continues and continues and continues long after the last funnel has disappeared below the surface. That sound is something else. It is the sound of 1,500 people. You should sit with that number for a moment. 1,500 people in water that is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, in the dark, in the middle of the North Atlantic, 400 yards from where you are sitting. The sound they make is not screaming, or it is screaming, but screaming is too small a word for it. Screaming implies something individual and directional, a sound with a source you can locate and move toward or away from. This sound is not individual. That this sound is collective in a way that the word collective does not begin to address, the way a crowd is not a collection of people, but something that becomes its own entity, with its own voice, its own weight, its own terrible authority. The 1,500 voices become one voice, and the one voice is the voice of the ocean itself, the voice of the thing that has always been underneath everything, the thing that the ship and the lights and the music and the champagne and the Egyptian cotton and all of the magnificent human effort of the Titanic were built to keep at bay. The voice carries across the flat water. It fills the boat. It fills you. The cold is already deep in your hands. You have been in this boat for 30 minutes, and the cold of the North Atlantic has been working its way through your gloves and into your fingers with patient, steady intent. And your grip on the tiller is the grip of a man holding something, not because his hands have warmth in them, but because his will does. But the cold in your hands is nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what the sound does to the inside of your chest when it reaches you, because the sound is not abstract. The sound is people. The sound is the specific, unbearable fact that the people making it were alive an hour ago, were walking the same deck you walked, were eating in rooms below the rooms where you ate, were people who had a destination, who had someone waiting for them, who had a life on the other side of this crossing that they were moving toward. And now they are in 28-degree water, in the dark, and the sound they are making is the sound of all of that ending. You grip the tiller. You look at the people in the boat around you. They are looking at you. 64 faces. 64 people who are alive because you put them in this boat. 64 people looking at you with the look of people waiting for a decision. And behind you, 400 yards of flat black water and 1,500 voices, and the question that will define the rest of your life hanging in the air between you and them like something physical, like something you could reach out and take hold of. Do you go back? You know the arguments against going back. You know them the way you know a sea chart, completely, in detail, with the kind of knowledge that has been built up over years and that you trust because it has earned your trust. The first argument is swamping. A lifeboat approached by people in the water is not a rescue vessel. It is a target. People in cold water lose rational decision-making. They do not queue politely and take turns boarding in an orderly fashion. They grab, they climb, they do what human beings do when they are dying, and a thing that might save them is within reach. They take hold of it, and they do not let go. The lifeboat sits low in the water, with 64 people aboard. It's freeboard. The distance between the waterline and the gunwale is perhaps 14 inches. And a single person grabbing the gunwale and pulling with the full strength of terror is enough to take on water. 3 people, grabbing the same side, could capsize it. Capsize means 64 people in 28-degree water instead of 0. Means the calculation that was already catastrophic becomes worse. Means the boat that was supposed to be part of the solution becomes part of the problem. You know this. You have seen it. In training, in simulation, in the accounts of other disasters. The calculus of lifeboat rescue in open water is not sentimental, and it is not kind. It is a calculation, and the calculation says, a boat at capacity in open water, approaching panicking swimmers, is at serious risk of being overwhelmed, and a swamped boat helps no one. The second argument is the cold. Every minute in 28-degree water is a minute closer to the point where survival becomes impossible. The window for pulling survivors from the water is not infinite. It is measured in minutes, not hours, and it is already closing. The calculation that matters is not simply whether you go back, but when, and the when is now, or it is never. The third argument is your responsibility to the people already in the boat. 64 people who are your responsibility. 64 people who boarded this boat, trusting that the officer in charge would make decisions that kept them alive. The risk you take by approaching the site is not only yours, it is theirs, every one of them, without their consent. And the question of whether you have the right to risk their lives for the possibility of saving others is not a question with an obvious answer. These are the arguments. You know them, you believe them, and behind you, across 400 yards of flat black water, the sound continues. The sound does not stop for arguments. The sound does not stop for calculations. The sound is simply there. The way the ocean is simply there. The way the cold is simply there. The most real thing in the world at this moment. More real than the arguments, and more real than the calculations, and more real than anything you have ever heard or will ever hear again. And it is asking you something that the arguments cannot answer, because the arguments are about probability and risk, and the sound is about something else entirely. The sound is about the specific, individual, unrepeatable fact of each of the people making it. You sit with the tiller in your frozen hands. You listen. The sound goes on. You have been sitting here for 25 minutes. 25 minutes of listening and calculating and arguing with yourself, and the sound has not stopped, and the water is 28 degrees, and the window is closing, and you are still in the same place you were when the sound started. And you know, with the part of you that is below the arguments, below the training, below the 14 years of making yourself into the man you are, you know what you are going to do. You tell the other boats to come together. There are 4 boats in your immediate vicinity, scattered across the water, each maintaining its own position, each doing the same, waiting and watching and not deciding that you have been doing. You call across the water, your voice carrying in the flat, cold air with the clarity of a voice that has been trained for exactly this, for being heard across open water, in conditions that swallow sound. And the boats respond, rowing toward each other until they are close enough to pass a rope between. And you lash them together in a cluster, 4 boats joined into something more stable than each alone. And you redistribute the passengers, some from your boat to the others, making room, making the calculation that the risk of swamping is now reduced by the stability of the cluster, that 4 boats lashed together are harder to capsize than 1 boat alone. It takes 18 minutes during which the sound continues, during which you are aware, with every heartbeat, of the window closing, of the 28 degrees doing their work, of the minutes that are not minutes, the way minutes normally are. Each one a specific, irreversible loss. A door closing on the specific person or people for whom that minute was the last possible minute. You do not let yourself think about that. You do the work. At 2:45, with the cluster stable and the redistribution done, you take 3 volunteers and you turn boat 14 around. You row toward the sound. The sound is smaller now. This is the thing you were not prepared for. Not the sound at its height, which was the most terrible thing you had ever heard, but the sound diminished. The sound growing quieter, not because the people are being saved, but because they are no longer making it. The specific silence that is spreading across the water as the cold finishes its work. The silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that used to be sound and is not anymore, that used to be people and is not anymore. You row harder, The oars are biting the water, and your hands have almost no feeling in them. The cold has moved from your fingers into your palms and is working toward your wrists, and gripping the oar is an act of will rather than sensation. You can see your hands wrapped around the handle, but you cannot feel them. And you row with your arms and your shoulders and your back and whatever is below all of that, whatever is underneath the physical, and the thing that keeps a person moving when the body has run out of reasons. You reach the place where the ship went down. The water is covered with objects, deck chairs, rope, pieces of wooden paneling, a child's coat floating face down, the debris of everything the Titanic carried into the ocean and left on the surface when it went. And among the debris, the people. The ones who are left. Fewer than you expected, fewer than you hoped, more than you were prepared for. You pull 13 people from the water. 13. You will count them for the rest of your life. Not because you doubt the number. You do not doubt the number. The number is exact and documented and repeated in every account of that night. But because the number is the answer to the question you asked yourself when you turned the boat around. The answer to the question of whether going back mattered. And the answer is 13. And 13 is both more than nothing and less than everything. And you will spend decades understanding what to do with it. The first survivor you reach is a man. You do not know his class, cannot determine it in the dark and the cold from the look of him, which is the look of a man who has been in 28-degree water for 40 minutes and whose body has made the last possible argument it knows how to make and is losing. You get him over the gunwale with the help of 2 of the crew. He is almost unable to help himself, the muscles of his arms and legs responding only partially to the signals his mind is still trying to send, his body having already begun the surrender that the cold demands. You get him in, and you keep moving. The second survivor is a woman. She is conscious. She is holding on to a deck chair with her arms because her hands have no grip left in them. The hands are white, the color of hands that have gone past cold into something else, the color of hands in which the blood has withdrawn as far as it will go and will not come back without warmth and time, and possibly not even then. You take her under the arms and you lift her, and she makes a sound when you lift her. Not a cry of pain, something more involuntary than that. The sound of a body registering the movement after the stillness of the water. And you get her in. You keep going. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Some of them are not alive when you reach them. You know this before you reach them. You can see it in the way they float. The specific stillness that is different from the stillness of a living person, trying to conserve heat. A stillness that is complete and final, and that your body recognizes before your mind catches up. You pass them. You do not stop. You look for the ones who are still moving, still making sounds, still doing the last impossible work of staying alive, and you go to them. The 12th survivor is a boy, perhaps 16, perhaps younger. The cold has made age difficult to read, has stripped away the surface details that normally give you a face's history. He is alone on a piece of paneling, on his back, his eyes open, but not quite focused. The eyes of someone who is still in there, but retreating. The consciousness drawing inward and away from the cold and the dark, and the particular silence that has settled over the water now that most of the voices have stopped. You reach over the gunwale and take his wrist. You can feel the pulse through his coat sleeve, fast and thin, the pulse of a body making its last argument. And you pull him in. He is alive. You look around. The water is silent now. The debris rocks gently, and the stars are enormous above the flat black surface, and the cold is absolute, and there is no sound except the oars and the breathing of the people in the boat. And somewhere behind you, the soft, intermittent crying of one of the survivors, who has been crying since you pulled her in, and has not stopped, and will not stop for some time. The sound of a person processing something that the human mind was not designed to process quickly. You look for more. There are no more. 13. You went back for 1500, and you found 13. The window was 40 minutes, and the window closed while you were lashing the boats together and making the calculation and finding the courage to turn around. And when you turned around, most of the window was already gone. 13 people alive, 1500 gone. And the question you will ask yourself for the rest of your life. If you had turned around sooner, 10 minutes sooner, 5 minutes sooner, how many more? You wait. There is nothing else to do now. The water is searched. The survivors are in the boats. The boats are drifting on the flat black surface of the North Atlantic in the hour before dawn, and you wait for the ship that the wireless room called for. The ship that is coming. The ship that will either be here in time or will not. The cold is different now from what it was when you first got into the boat. In the first hour, the cold was a condition, something you were aware of, something you were managing, something that was present the way the dark was present and the sound was present, as one element of the situation you were dealing with. Now the cold has stopped being a condition and become something more intimate. And it has been in your hands for 2 hours, and it has moved from your hands into your wrists, and from your wrists up your forearms, and the movement of it is not painful exactly. Pain requires a certain sensitivity in the tissue, and the cold has removed the sensitivity, which is both a mercy and a warning. But you can feel it as a boundary, a line moving inward, the boundary between where you can feel and where you cannot. You move your fingers. They move. Not quickly, not with the automatic ease of hands that are warm and responsive, but they move. The tendons doing the work that the muscles cannot fully manage. And you keep doing this, moving the fingers, making fists, releasing. Because stopping is not something you are going to do, not yet. Not while there are people in this boat who need someone to be in charge, and you are still capable of being in charge. Around you, the survivors from the water are being covered with whatever the people in the boats can offer. Coats removed from backs. Blankets that were brought by passengers who had the presence of mind to bring them. Bodies pressed against bodies for warmth in the unself-conscious way of people for whom the normal boundaries of personal space have been dissolved by the cold. You watch the people in your boat arrange themselves around the 13 survivors with a care and a tenderness that is one of the things you will remember. Not only the terrible things, the sound and the cold and the arithmetic, but this, the way people on a lifeboat in the North Atlantic at 3 in the morning will give their coat to a stranger. You think about the people who are not in the boats. You let yourself do it, just for a moment, just now in the quiet of the waiting. You let yourself think about the specific people you watched board this ship in Southampton 4 days ago. The faces you passed in corridors. The passengers you directed to their stations. The people who existed for you as names on a manifest and as faces seen briefly in the organized chaos of a major departure. You think about the faces. You think about where they are now. You stop. You look at the horizon. There is a light. It is moving. It is the Carpathia. And she is still miles away, but she is coming, and she is real, and her lights are the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. Not because you were afraid of dying, though you were, though the cold has been having a conversation with that part of you for 2 hours. But because her lights mean this part is almost over, and what comes after this part is something you might somehow be able to live through. You board the Carpathia at 4:30. The boarding is a rope ladder, and your hands that cannot fully feel the rungs, and the specific effort of a man climbing something with arms that have been rowing a boat for 3.5 hours in below freezing temperatures, the arms doing the work anyway, the will finding the muscle fibers that the cold has not yet reached, and using them, one rung at a time. At the top of the ladder, hands reach for you. You take them. They pull you over the rail and you are on a deck, and the deck is solid and the deck is warm. Not warm. Not warm the way a room is warm, but warm compared to the open ocean at 4 in the morning in April. Warm in the way of a ship that is running its boilers and has walls and a roof and exists in the human world, rather than the one you have been in for the last 3.5 hours. And you stand on it for a moment and let it be solid beneath your feet. Someone gives you a blanket. Someone gives you hot coffee, and your hands are shaking so badly that the cup rattles in the saucer. And a woman, a Carpathia passenger in her dressing gown, one of the people who came on deck when they heard the news, takes the cup back and holds it for you, and you drink it held by her hands, and something in your chest cracks open slightly, just slightly. The thing you have been holding shut since 11:40 last night. Opening a fraction, because the Carpathia is solid and the coffee is hot and there are no more decisions that need to be made right now. And you find a corner of the deck. You sit down. Around you, the survivors of the Titanic are being brought aboard, one by one up the rope ladders, some walking, some helped, some carried. You watch them come. You look for faces, the faces of the passengers you loaded into the boats, the faces you can remember from the deck in those last hours, the face of the young man who stepped back when you fired the revolver. You do not see his face. You look for it for a long time. You do not see it. The Carpathia's crew move through the survivors with blankets and coffee and the specific purposeful gentleness of people who have woken to a disaster and decided to meet it with everything they have. And the servers receive this care with the quiet of people who have passed through something that has not yet fully resolved itself into the past, who are still partly in it, who will be partly in it for a very long time. You sit in your corner. The blanket is around your shoulders. The sun is beginning somewhere far to the east, not visible yet but present in the lightening of the sky at the horizon, the dark giving way to a gray that is not warmth, but is the precursor of warmth, the promise of a day coming. You close your eyes. The sound is there. It will always be there. But here is the other thing that is also true, that you will spend years learning to hold alongside the sound. You went back. When the window was almost closed, you turned the boat around and you went back. You found 13 people who were still alive. 13 people who are on this ship right now, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee, watching the dawn come up. 13 people whose specific, individual, unrepeatable lives did not end last night because you turned the boat around. That is not nothing. That is not nothing. New York, April 18th. The Carpathia docks at Pier 54 in the rain at 9:30 in the evening, 3 days after she left the debris field of the Titanic. The city has turned out in the way that cities turn out for catastrophes. 30,000 people on the piers and in the streets surrounding them. The crowd pressing against the barriers. The newspapers already running their headlines. The world that has been waiting 3 days for this ship to arrive, now receiving it in the specific combination of grief and spectacle that catastrophe produces. You stand at the rail as she comes in. You look at the crowd below, and you do not see what they see, which is survivors, which is the living brought back from the dead. And you see what is not there. The faces that should be at the rail beside you and are not. The people who should be watching New York come close and are not watching anything. The specific absences that are distributed through the crowd of survivors like the missing teeth in a broken comb. You see the boy, the 16-year-old you pulled from the water, the 12th survivor, the one whose wrist you held and whose pulse you felt. He is at the rail 30 feet from you. He is looking at the crowd below with the face of someone who has not yet decided what expression is appropriate for what he is feeling, because what he is feeling does not have an established expression, because no established expression was designed for this. He sees you looking at him. He holds your gaze for a moment. Then he nods. A small, precise nod. At the nod of someone acknowledging a debt that language is not adequate to name. You nod back. The ship docks. You go down the gangplank into the noise and the lights and the rain of New York. And the sound is with you as you go, as it will be when you sit before the Senate inquiry next week, as it will be when you testify in London, as it will be when you marry and have children, and grow old in a world that slowly stops talking about the Titanic and moves on to other things and other disasters, as it will be in the last room you are ever in 1944, when you are 60 years old, and the war has produced sounds that the world never thought it would have to hear. The sound does not leave. But here is what you also carry, what you will always carry alongside it. The weight of 13 people who are alive. 13 is not 1,500. 13 is not enough. 13 is not nothing. You went back. Close your eyes. You went back. A note of history. Harold Godfrey Lowe was real. He was 28 years old on the night of April 14th, 1912, and he was the fifth officer of the RMS Titanic, the youngest officer in the ship's command structure. He was born in Barmouth, Wales, in 1882, and had gone to sea against his father's wishes at 14, working on cargo ships operating along the West African coast before moving to the Atlantic passenger trade and eventually to White Star Line. The incident with the revolver is documented. As Lowe was loading his boat, a group of men surged toward it, and he fired 3 shots along the side of the hull, not at the men, but into the air alongside the boat, to drive them back. He testified to this at the United States Senate inquiry in April 1912, and again at the British Board of Trade inquiry in May. But he was unapologetic about it. His exact testimony: "I knew that the boat would be swamped if I did not do something." He was right. The decision to return to the wreck site was Lowe's alone. He was the only lifeboat officer to organize a return to the debris field after the ship sank. He redistributed passengers among 4 boats, then rowed back with a skeleton crew. He pulled 13 people from the water. Many of the others he found were already dead when he reached them. The cold had done its work in the 40 to 50 minutes between the sinking and his return. He testified that he believed he could have saved more people if he had gone back sooner, and the testimony carries the weight of a man who knew exactly what those lost minutes had cost. Of the approximately 1,500 people who entered the water when the Titanic sank, fewer than 40 were eventually pulled into lifeboats. The North Atlantic in April at that latitude is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the average person loses the ability to swim within 10 minutes, loses consciousness within 15 to 30 minutes, and dies within 30 to 60 minutes. The lifeboats that did not return to the debris field, nearly all of them, generally cited the fear of being swamped by panicking swimmers. Subsequent maritime historians have argued that this fear was largely overstated, and that a coordinated return by the boats could have saved a significant number of additional lives. Lowe was one of the most outspoken witnesses at both inquiries. He gave his testimony in direct, sometimes blunt terms that stood out against the careful diplomatic language of most of the officers. When a U.S. senator questioned him about his actions in a way he found imprecise, he interrupted to clarify. He was not apologetic. He was not deferential. He was a 28-year-old Welshman who had been through one of the worst nights in maritime history and had decided that the truth was more important than how it sounded. He married in 1912, after the inquiries were concluded. He had 3 children. He served in the First World War in the Royal Naval Reserve. He died in 1944, at the age of 61. Lifeboat 14's 13 survivors are not individually named in most historical accounts. They are a number, They appear in documents as a count, 13, rather than as people with names and faces and lives that continued after that night. Some of them almost certainly went on to live long lives. Some of them probably never recovered. All of them got off the Carpathia in New York on April 18, 1912, in the rain, and walked into a world that was still there, because Harold Lowe turned his boat around. 13 is not enough. 13 is not nothing. Good night.